And I know we kind of chimed on this as we're talking through stuff. So what's your thoughts on the primary arms versus the Zeiss, like a cheaper $700 versus like a $2,300 optic?
I will say, like, if you're a level 20 wizard like I am, that primary arms is going to be a lot easier to just pick up and learn the reticle itself. Now, if you're a level 100 wizard like Walsh is, the Zeiss, you could probably figure it out, do some training, and hit the target just like with the primary arms. But as a new user for a precision type scope, primary arms is the winner for me.
Hey Wizards, welcome back. We're doing things inside now because there's apparently some sort of blizzard going on outside, so I'm stuck in here. But I wanted to keep some of these comparisons going as I have two different scopes that both seem really, really good, but they're wildly different in terms of cost. And I've always wondered like what you actually get with like a ZCO tier of optic, like when you pay $3,000 to $4,000 for a scope. I'm pretty interested to find out if the more expensive scope like makes things inherently easier to just zero and shoot, or if it's just like, a series of refinements that cost a ton of money that just take the scope from like an 8 to a 10, and I guess we'll find out. So today we'll be comparing the $800 Primary Arms GLx 4-16 with the Athena reticle versus the $2,300 Zeiss LRP S3 4-25 with the ZF-MRi reticle. And yes, it's not totally lost to me that this really isn't a perfect comparison for like a mid and high tier optic, but you haven't seen either of these, and you know what? It's close enough for us to be able to see the differences. And I think you're going to be pretty surprised how it all actually worked out in the end when Cody and I went and tested out both these optics. I will say though, in order to keep it at least somewhat reasonable in comparison, I did dial down the Zeiss to 16x during the shooting part, so we kind of see the same thing and one doesn't have like a huge advantage of the other. And I know I'm going to get some Reddit fart board that's going to tell me that it's ridiculous to compare a Zeiss versus a primary arms, but I'll tell you right now, that GLX is no slouch. As like with the GLX 1-6 Griffin, you get like 90% of the PLX features at like half the cost, giving you an insane bang for the buck. And really all I'm saying is that I haven't had a problem yet in hitting the 600-yard gong with one of the GLXs. But let's add even more chaos to this whole thing with two new optics. Let's also put them on a brand new platform and show it off on the all-new IWI Zion SPR 18-inch version. I'm starting to wonder if this video is just an excuse to show off a pile of things that have been sitting in the basement. But I figured it would be a great opportunity to test out the 18-inch Zion and see how it performs while we're working on a full review of this rifle. But huge thanks to Primary Arms, Zeiss, and IWI for all the optics and platforms you're seeing today. And we got some super cool footage during our shooting portion on our Zeiss Conquest 85 spotting scope. So again, big thanks to Zeiss and all the other brands for allowing us to show all this cool stuff to you. So I'm just as excited as you all to get started and see where this comparison actually ends up and see what you get. So let's start with the actual like scope specs and see what happens when you start to really dial up the cost. Now, we mentioned the magnification comparison isn't perfect, as the Zeiss S3 is a 4-25 with a magnification multiple of a little over 6, and the Primary Arms 4-16 giving a magnifier multiplier of 4. The Zeiss then gives a much larger magnification range, but physics does come into play, and that results in a tighter overall eye box. This means the Primary Arms is a bit less punishing at higher magnification ranges, but it can't reach out and see nearly as far as the Zeiss S3 can. Let's keep our eyes and our focus on the price comparison though, as I really don't think price really comes into play with magnification ranges or eye box. And that's mostly because we're talking about light and physics, and no real amount of money is going to change the way light and physics operates. Both companies can and do make magnification ranges in the same ranges of each other, and you would see a comparatively more forgiving eye box if the Zeiss was in like a 5x20 or like a 6x24. And just for example, I did some research into it and found there is also a 5x25 in the budget SLX line from Primary Arms, also with the same Athena reticle we're showing today. So it really kind of drives it home that paying more doesn't really give you more magnification or a better eye box. because magnification and eye box are just math problems, physics, nothing to do with money. The Zeiss also has a 34mm scope housing compared to the Primary Arms 30mm. Here we see another trade-off as the 34mm allows for more light into the housing, increasing light output at higher magnification ranges, along with increasing light at dawn or dusk. The trade-off is that the 34mm uses larger materials all around, adding more weight to the overall unit. The GLx 3-16 uses a more standard 30mm, which helps to reduce the overall weight, while still giving you a great visual picture out to 16x. And while 34mm scopes aren't like inherently hard to find, I do find that I prefer 30mm just because they're easier to source, and Primary Arms does make some scopes in 34mm also. But much like Zeiss, these 34mm scopes are often in the more expensive PLX lineup like the Apollo and the other longer range scopes. The PLXC LPVO actually uses 30mm though, so it can keep the weight down, as anybody that uses a heavy LPVO probably drinks with both hands. So it seems like with the larger glass and the larger housing, you're paying more for the 34mm over the 30, which then means your bucks are actually paying for an overall brighter image in higher magnification and in low light situations. But with this kind of massive difference in price, there's got to be something different than just, the housings, right? I don't know. Let's keep at it. Now here, looking at glass quality, we see a pretty stark difference, with the Zeiss giving an insanely detailed and rich image compared to the same view out of the Primary Arms when looking at a target at a distance of about 600 yards. We can also see the Zeiss retains that insane image quality when we crank the magnification all the way up to 25. And right here, pretty much everyone watching this comparison is probably going to go, well, there you go, right there, that's where you're spending all your money, that glass quality is nuts. And looking at the footage with you, I completely agree. But what I found interesting is I never even noticed how stark the difference between the two was, like even after shooting them, until I compared the two images like side by side when I was editing this. And I'm pretty excited to hear Cody's thoughts as pertaining to actual shooting, as he hasn't seen this and neither of us noted any issues with image quality when we did the actual shooting. So then maybe that's where that cost is coming into, because yes, the Zeiss has a ton better image quality, but it makes for a bigger question of like, does that really actually impact shootability, or does it not impact it at the distances we're going out to? I think it's a fantastic question though, maybe like the overarching question of it all. And I'm pretty excited to talk to Cody about it when he comes over and we use him kind of as a control when we look at all the shooting footage. But let's keep this moving and talk about the scope mounts we're using. For the Zeiss, I put on a ScalarWorks Leap mount to keep weight down, and for the Primary Arms, we use the PLXC scope mount. Yes, you can put a top dot on the PLX. No, you can't do it on the ScalarWorks, but it has this like sidekick side mount thing. I also did these mounts because they're fairly easy to remove because we had to switch everything over on the range, like how the ScalarWorks has these like hand-tight dials. But I will tell you that it kind of bit us in the ass in the shooting footage that I'll show you later. We made it work though, so we won't count against the scope, but I probably should have used this beefy-ass ADM mount as it has some different QD feet. The S3 would probably weigh like 8 pounds if I put the ADM mount on there, but the ScalarWorks in the end just didn't inspire a lot of confidence, and I definitely would swap it over to the ADM mount if we're going to go out and do some more shooting with the S3. And I actually wanted to do an even more ridiculous comparison when I started this video idea with the Zeiss S5, but that housing is so big, the S5 needed scope rings or like a 1.7 or 1.9 34mm mount. So S3 it is, and interestingly, after using them both, I really thought the S3 was significantly better. But that was quite the tangent I took you all on, so let's look at the actual magnification ring, the magnification adjustment, and the diopter, and see if any real magic happens when you start to crank up the cost. On the Zeiss, the magnification is just smooth as butter, and you have clear magnification index lines for every magnification level all the way from 5 up to 25. There is also an included throw lever that can be adjusted to 3 different positions or just be removed entirely. The Primary Arms 3-18 has a nice smooth magnification throw also, but it's just a little bit less refined. The magnification ring doesn't have the same indicators as the Zeiss to show you each different magnification increment, but I don't think you're really confused as to where you're at in terms of magnification levels. The Primary Arms has a throw lever nub that can also be placed in 3 different positions. I found the nub to be a little harder to use than the throw lever, but it was still nice to have it included. With the nub or throw lever, I don't think that's really any part of this when we're looking at the difference in price between these two optics though. I mean, you could always just buy a throw lever and throw it on the GLx from like MK Machining if you wanted to. So I don't think that's it at all. Looking at the diopters, we see a minimalistic look on the Zeiss with the smooth and clean diopter design. The GLx has a rubberized design for what I thought was a better grip, but it gives you almost an identical level of resistance to the Zeiss. The primary arms also has a dot for reference, so you can reset your diopter to your setting if you let someone else use your optic. And sure, you could just add a dot in like 2 seconds to the Zeiss diopter if you wanted to do that, but I did find that I like the rubberized grip of the primary arms optic just a little bit better. So no, it's not like a huge difference between the diopters and the magnification ring. It's just pretty similar, and I think you're really just getting more refinement, or it's just preferences. But what about the great equalizer when we start to look at reticles? Here we see the GLx uses the Athena reticle, which uses a full mil-grid Christmas tree with a center chevron aiming point, along with horizontal and vertical ranging markers, giving the user a full-featured weapon system to range and engage targets, along with making shooting corrections easy. And the Griffin reticle is my overall favorite, but the Athena is a solid second because with that mil-grid Christmas tree, you can still do the same multi-barrel and multi-caliber like you can do with the Griffin reticle. On the Zeiss, you have the ZF-MRi reticle that also has a full grid Christmas tree, but now the center uses a mil-grid cross with individual mil markings along each section. For ranging, you also have multiple small mil markings everywhere that allow you to determine target distance if you math it all out. I don't know, I guess when I increase price, I would have expected to see a difference here, but instead I see 2 amazing reticles that just have two different purposes. The Zeiss MRI really leans more into precision shooting with the more busy and precise markings, while the primary arms Athena lends more into tactical shooting with ranging built in but giving a cleaner overall field of view for target engagement. It's just interesting because if I wanted a more target engagement platform, I'd want to use the GLx with the Athena reticle, but if I wanted that ultra precision, I'd want to use the S3 with the MRI reticle. And maybe there's a good life lessoning happening at this exact moment that perhaps a few of us should repeat a few times. And that's because using the right gear for the right situation matters a whole lot more than which one costs more. As you could, in this scenario, pay way more and not get a tactical focus, or pay far too little and not get that ultra precision. But going back, it's pretty obvious that the difference in price isn't the reticle, as they're both amazing reticles that just focus on 2 different things. But there is also the argument that you could just use the turrets on the GLx for that ultra precision, and I guess that's just a good segue into the turrets. Looking at these, we see that GLx uses a locking top and side turret with 0.1 mil adjustment increments, allowing you to press the release button and dial adjustments in for that more fine precision if you need it. The locking function also acts as a return to 0, making for fast and easy adjustments or a quick 0 reset. The Zeiss turrets have a large barrel and locking windage turrets with the same 0.1 mil adjustments. These turrets are ultra fine and give you a positive click and movement that you could easily feel even through a gloved hand. Again though, we're seeing like 2 different types of application, from like tactical to precision, and not really like, that one is better than the other. Like for instance, I don't really want big, bulky turrets on a tactical platform, and vice versa, I don't need a super fast return to 0 tactical turret on a more precision-minded scope. It's just a continual echo that, I don't know, maybe this is a bad comparison, but the biggest thing to remember is that the cost of something isn't a true indicator of the best use case of that product. Let's look at Parralax though, and the Zeiss and primary arms both have long throws that start at 15 meters and go out to infinity. The primary arms has rough indicators of each distance, where the Zeiss just has this growing field to indicate more distance, I suppose. And while the numbers next to the Parralax setting are generally pretty trash, they're a better reference point than this or this. So No, the price difference definitely isn't in the Parralax. Now, Cody said he was coming over. I hope he didn't get like lost in the snow or something.
It's freezing out here.
So then, Cody, after you shooting scopes, how would you compare, like what would be the way you would compare like a high price scope versus a cheaper scope?
So first I'd want to start off in zeroing, and we could increase the distance from there and take them out to range and see how they compare to each other.
All right, let's do it. So first we'll look at the zero.
So here I didn't participate in the zeroing as much as Walsh did. So he did the bore sighting, he did the zeroing, and we kind of took it from there. But they both looked pretty similar in the zeroing portion of this film.
And they took both about 3 shots to zero.
Yeah.
I definitely wouldn't say that a more expensive scope was easier to zero. We zero a lot of scopes, and it was all the same. So next, let's take out to 100 and see what else we can do.
Yeah. First, we took the primary arms out to 100 yards, and we didn't have any issues hitting the target at this point, at this range. We were using a ballistic calculator to kind of find our point and our reference in the reticle, and at this distance, it wasn't hard on either one of these 2 scopes.
So then what's cool is we actually met another viewer, so big thanks to Austin who was out there, who let us actually take a couple shots at his gong. Unfortunately, this was only when we had the Zeiss, so we got to try that one out. So Cody, what were your thoughts on the Zeiss when we're actually shooting at the gong?
Yeah, so at this point, we're taking it out to 300 yards, and this is where you start to notice how busy that reticle is.
And I will say, kind of looking at this footage, Cody was trying to give me a reference of where that was at on the actual reticle. And it was so busy, I didn't understand what he was saying and had to kind of make some shots and correct. So that's where my thoughts were of like talking and communicating to each other. It was a little too busy to do that.
Yeah, going off of the reference from the ballistic calculator and trying to put that on the reticle that we were actually looking through. And in order to translate that to Walsh as we're shooting, I was like, I'm using the cross, and it's 2 mils below this point, and there's 90 crosses on that reticle.
Yeah, it's like which cross are you asking me to look at? So let's go back to the overarching idea. Was one reticle or one scope, did the cost of one make it inherently easier to shoot at 100 or 300?
Yeah, not in my opinion. Due to my lack of experience with mil-dot reticles, I thought they were both easy once we figured out that reference point that we were looking for, but the primary arms reticle, in my opinion, was way crisper, way cleaner, and easier to find the reference point that we needed.
Yeah, and what's interesting, he says that, we'll come to it in a minute as we go to further distances, because we did see, and he hasn't seen it, that the image quality is a little bit better on the Zeiss, so it's interesting he says that. But let's move out to 430 yards and do kind of the same thing and look at that and compare it in terms of shootability.
So with the primary arms out at 400 yards, I found it was a lot easier, again, to find that reference point that we needed from the ballistic calculator. And it was also easy to translate that over to Walsh when he took over. The clarity of the primary arms I felt was fine, and I honestly wasn't even trying to compare the 2 as far as clarity, which I know is the whole point of this video, but I didn't notice anything initially out at the range as far as clarity between the 2 scopes, the primary arms and the Zeiss. The only thing that stuck out to me out there was the clutteredness of the reticles. At 400 yards, again, both scopes were on. Again, the primary arms to me was just easier to find that reference point from the ballistic calculator.
And so then I took over shooting, and basically I was taking the shots, and I was missing at the beginning, really because I wasn't used to the IWI Zion. I was used to the 20-inch. I kind of knew what my markings were. So unfortunately, I was kind of going off that and not really listening to what Cody was saying. So that's kind of my fault. But we were able to give good communication based off the reticle and how it was designed to clearly articulate that and kind of know within just a few mil markings of where we should be. So then once we had it all dialed in, I think it was pretty easy. Once I kind of knew the difference between the 18 and the 20-inch, we knew exactly where to hit. Then we were able to hit the 430-yard target really easily and repeatedly.
Now we're taking the Zeiss out to 430. So this is where you start to see the little minute details in the reticle, using that ballistic calculator, giving us the reference point, and having to count all the different hash marks in the reticle, look at all the different reference points in the reticle, and try to figure out, okay, where am I going to need to aim to hit the target? And this was very hard to translate over to Walsh after when he takes over.
So, and me trying to translate everything over to Cody, made us realize at this point that the ScalarWorks mount wasn't tightened down all the way and all of our zero had shifted. So we made some adjustments and tightened everything up, and thankfully it still worked out. But you'll notice the mill markings are going to be, it's about a mil off now, but we made it work.
Once we got the scope all bolted down, we were starting to tag the target at this point. At 4:30, again, I know I keep bringing up the fact that the reticle was busy, but that's really all I was focused on out there, other than being cold. So for me, I say this all the time, but mission dictates gear. At this point, if you're going to buy a Zeiss, hopefully Uncle Sam or somebody like that's going to pay for it. If you're going to go spend your own money, I would just go with Primary Arms. So out at the range, I didn't notice any difference in clarity between the Zeiss and the Primary Arms. Honestly, that's never been anything I look for. I look for simplicity in the reticle. That may be a bias of mine as far as reticle simplicity. I think Primary Arms has figured that out. They've broken the code for that. But however, the clarity between the two wasn't noticeable out at the range for me.
And same with me when I was shooting. Once I saw Cody had it all dialed in, I was just able to rock 3 shots. So the biggest thing though, then I guess we'll say again, out to 430 yards, yet again, we're starting to get we're getting kind of near the limited distance of this rifle. Between $700 and $2,600, $2,300, there's no real difference between the two. They had different applications, like kind of we've been talking about when we talk about the reticles and the turrets and everything else. But one is not inherently easier at this point to zero or take out to distance. But we'll continue this going, and let's look at the 600-yard shots, and then we'll kind of do our final thoughts. I think you're going to know what they are.
Just look how much cleaner that reticle is compared to the Zeiss. The Primary Arms was way easier to make adjustments. Walsh was giving me adjustments over my shoulder as I'm missing, telling me there's a different reference point to use in the reticle. I was able to get it on target a lot easier than if I was using the Zeiss.
Yeah, just look at this, because once he kind of saw, he missed those first few shots, saw me shooting, and then here's some footage of him shooting again with just some small corrections, and he hits the target every time. Now, switching over to the Zeiss for me, I'm more familiar with these reticles and more of these optics, so I didn't have any issues shooting out to 600. The image quality was good, but it wasn't anything remarkable. Like, we didn't stop for a moment and pause and tell each other about it.
Bro, holy hash marks. See how cluttered it is at this point now? I can't even figure out, are we 19 hash marks below the crosshairs, or where are we at on this reticle? I still was able to hit the target. However, this reticle was not intuitive for me as a new user of a mil-dot reticle to hit the target. The Primary Arms was far easier for me.
So again, we've now reached out even further in terms of distance, and we've pretty much hit every single target. Like, the times we've missed were because we didn't have the correct adjustments, or we just needed to move some things around, or we just didn't secure the mount down completely. So then, what are your thoughts on a comparison? Like, I know my own ideas. Like, I'm going with the same thing we're saying. Like, I think it's kind of a refinement as you increase in price, but it's not necessarily like you get something holistically better. And I know we kind of chimed on this as we're talking through stuff. So what's your thoughts on the Primary Arms versus the Zeiss, like a cheaper $700 versus like a $2,300 optic?
I will say, like, if you're a level 20 wizard like I am, that Primary Arms is going to be a lot easier to just pick up and learn the reticle itself. Now, if you're a level 100 wizard like Walsh is, the Zeiss, you could probably figure it out, do some training, and hit the target just like with the Primary Arms. But as a new user for a precision type scope, Primary Arms is the winner for me.
And it's a good question then. Did you find there were shots you could take with one scope that you couldn't take with the other?
I'll say that just the difference between being able to find the reference point from what the ballistic calculator was telling you to use was easier to translate over to the Primary Arms than it was the Zeiss for me.
It's just interesting to remember there's this overarching idea, and I think this is where we kind of end the video and kind of wrap everything up with, is what Cody was mentioning is where the mission dictates your gear, and the cost of the gear really isn't an accurate indicator of the correct gear to use for the application.
Obviously, with that higher price tag, you get more magnification, a clearer, crisper scope. But for me, it didn't make a difference in the testing that we did today. So as far as with the Zeiss, again, this goes back to mission dictates gear. So you don't want to, that scope was outside of my shooting abilities. The Primary Arms was within my shooting abilities. So that may be where my bias comes from with that. But again, For me, as a new precision shooter, I like the simplicity of the Primary Arms reticle over the Zeiss reticle.
So I hope that helps everybody out there kind of seeing a comparison versus some lower end, like a $700 Primary Arms optic versus super expensive $2,300 optic. And for me, it helped to kind of answer that question of like, what do you get in terms of like super high end? Like you go for a ZCO $3,000 to $4,000 optic. Like that was the whole question of this video. What do you really get? And to me, I think it just gives you some different applications. Like it more hones in the application and gives you more refinement, but it doesn't make everything like zeroing easier and shooting easier, maybe a little bit, but it's not like a wild jump, as wild as the price is anyway. But I want to say thanks to all of our YouTube members and all of our Patreon subscribers. You guys make all this possible where we can do all this ridiculous stuff. And I want to say big thanks to Cody for coming out and shooting today. Make sure to sound off in the comments so we can get him in here with us more. But otherwise, let us know down in the comments what you thought of the Zeiss versus the Primary Arms and which one you would pick. All right, everyone. Walsh and Cody out.
We don't have a magazine.
Well, you are a good parent. They're like, how's that one about to feel? Like, it's about to feel great. Like, cool. Well, you don't have a magazine.
Safety on?
Yeah. Safety check, good. Oh. Okay. I'm gonna laugh if you were shooting at 300. I don't think you were though.
Let me in, Walsh. It's freezing out here.
Comparing the Zeiss and the Primary Arms.
Timer. Can I put that on?
I was wondering when you're actually going to notice this. This is for everyone out there. All right, there you go. You need one of these.